Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us again. Hi, Barry.
Hi, Dale. It's good to be back. Let's get into this one.
Yes. Today is we're going to be talking about grief and the stages of grief and the different types of grief, and it seems very prevalent right now. I just did my last day of my 6-week program last Saturday, and we really took a lot of time talking about the grieving process. You know, the grieving of the end of a relationship, the end of your dreams, the end of your future that you thought you were going to have with somebody if you're separating or divorcing. And we talked about death as well, and how your life can change from one moment to the next so suddenly. I think it's up for me right now because I'm going to a funeral tomorrow, and as much as it's a cousin of my fiance's, and she died. She had a massive stroke, and then she died this weekend, and her husband, they were together for 57 years. And when you think about the impact of that you've spent your whole life with this other person, you have children and grandchildren, and, from one day to the next, it's just completely changed. So, and I know it's a subject that you talk about a lot too. So let's dive in.
Well, just to add some background, I've been a licensed spiritual counselor, professional counselor through my church for the last 20 plus years. And one of the components we really dive deep into in our training, and also what I've used with clients, is that place of holding space when somebody's going through grief, because it is something that everyone goes through on different levels and different experiences, as you said. But nobody's willing to face that, quote, demon of grief, because for some people, they're so afraid of it, they'll suppress it. So when we talk about it today, I want to make sure people get that grief is something that is natural, that is okay to feel. In fact, it's better to feel it than to ignore it or suppress it. So hopefully the conversation today will really help people get that comfort with knowing that grief is okay.
That's so true. I have quite a few friends who have, unfortunately, I live in a very, very small community, so we all know each other, who've lost their children, and to witness how each one has experienced that some of them feel guilty for continuing to live if their child doesn't get that opportunity. They feel it's in some way disloyal to that child. And then other friends who have created foundations and kept their child's name alive and doing good in the world. And there's no right way to do it or wrong way to do it. It's just the way you experience it, and to honor that and to never judge yourself, which however it shows up for you, to just allow that feeling to flow through you, to not suppress it, not judge it, not push it. I mean, another one is, I think, we hear about the 5 stages of grief from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the denial, the anger, the bargaining, the depression, and then the acceptance. And people hear that and they think they should be going through these stages in a linear fashion, and it doesn't work like that. We'll go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or even 2 steps back, and we start at the beginning again. But it's just, these are all aspects, and there's no real stages, as I would say, and there's no, as I said before, no right way or wrong way to do it, and to just be so tender with yourself no matter what it is you're going through.
I was going to say, actually, what you said there, let me course correct that. I think you said there is no right way or wrong way. The wrong way is not doing it. You said that.
That's true. What I mean is, until the process is done, there's no right or wrong way. But you're right, to not feel it, acknowledge it, and to judge it, that I would classify as wrong. That is not
right.
For
exactly.
everybody. So,
Well, the thing for grief for me is, and this is the thing I learned vividly, there are a couple of books I can recommend too that are really good books on this stuff. But the thing about grief is, yes, there are stages of grief, but they're not steps. And so some people think, like, when I get through this step, I'll get to the next step, and the next step's like, no, there's stages, meaning that You go through them in any sequence they show up, because the thing about grief is it is not logical. It's not sequential. It is not scheduled. So when grief happens, because it tends to happen when you go through stuff that you've gone feel emotional connection to, the parts of grief that show up in your life will happen the way they want to, so to speak. It's almost self-willed. And your only job, frankly, is to go with the flow. That's the best thing you can do, because grief is one of those things that if you fight it, it doesn't go away. It just simply sits there and goes, "I'll wait till you're done. I'm still going to show up."
Yeah.
And the thing about grief is such a gift in it. Again, I'll mention a couple of quotes that really resonate for me about what the power of grief is for us as human beings. But yes, to understand grief is an experience that when you go through it however it happens, and none of it's right, none of it's wrong. It just is.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention is, we tend to think of grief just around, the death of a person that we loved or cared about deeply, whether it's a parent, a partner, or a child, or a friend, or whatever. But we grieve over many losses in many different ways. I know when I got a divorce, I grieved. I grieved like it was a death. Not only because it was, I have revelations about my marriage that I was completely unaware of. So I grieved what I thought I'd had for 18 years. I had to grieve that. Then I had to grieve the dream I'd had of getting old with this person, raising our children together and grandchildren together and all of that. I had to grieve the future I thought I was going to have. So there were so many different layers of grief. It was unbelievable. And it took me down in such a way that I was finding it very, very hard to cope. But what I also was doing to myself was I was judging myself. I was thinking, well, they didn't die, so therefore am I entitled to feel the level of grief I feel? That was before I'd done enough work on myself to really realize, no, I had every right to grieve just as much as anybody else. And it's not, we can't compare our experiences and say a death is worse than a divorce or some other type of horrendous experience you can go through, because sometimes it's the death of innocence. That's a grieving process.
That's the thing. And oftentimes, the way I frame it a lot of ways for people is that in some ways, to me, the amount of grief you feel is really equivalent to the amount of love you had. So after a breakup, as much as it is after a death of somebody, it's the same thing as the amount of love you've lost because the person left you, either physically or geographically. You feel the same amount of grief. It's not right, wrong, or up and down, and one is better than the other. So you're absolutely right. It's true that grief is definitely personal and is your experience. And one of my favorite quotes, actually, which is from a Marvel show of all things, a show called WandaVision that was on Disney Plus, was "What is grief but love persevering?"
Yes, beautiful. I love that.
That quote was such a simple reminder that it is about the love. The grief people sometimes feel the grief is about the wailing and the gnashing of teeth and the upset and the feelings. Like, no, grief ultimately is a reminder that you loved. And that for me is a win.
Yeah, but it's also very interesting. And I've got two things I want to talk about. One is about my mother, the passing of my mother, and the other one is about my dog. But I'll say about my mother first. My mother was 91. She just about still recognized me. She was suffering from dementia. And as I mentioned, I'm one of 7 children, and unfortunately, my older sister passed away before my mother. But I honestly can't say that I really experienced grief when my mother passed. I felt like I had the honor of being with her when she passed in my arms, as 2 of my sisters were there too. We were like little puppies next to us, one of us holding her head, one holding her hands, the other one holding her feet, and we'd rotate because she unfortunately was in hospital and afraid. Even though she was in a coma, we knew she was afraid. But there was, and obviously because of her age, I was able to accept it more. But I also really feel, because I have such a strong spiritual foundation, that I just felt that she was moving from her human form, her earth suit, or whatever you want to call it, into the spirit. And I felt her presence so strongly with me. Even in at the funeral, I felt her sitting next to me. There was an empty seat next to me, which was pretty ironic. and I just felt her essence next to me, and I sort of had this joke with her. Well, at least I can save on the British Airways flights now. You can be with me, anytime you want. And yes, I missed her, but I did have, and interesting too, out of the 6 remaining children, we all had a very different experience. We all grieved very differently.
Oh yeah.
So that, I wanted to mention that, and then you share a bit, and then I'll talk about my dog. So.
Well, yeah, no, that's the thing. First of all, what I was going to say is that's the other part too about grief. It looks different for everybody. So there's no comparative thing with grief. So that's one thing. For my mother, because I brought up my members of mine, my mum got sick initially. But she said she got sick. I went to see her when she was at the depth of her illness, and I went back for the funeral. I grieved more after I went back to see her when she was sick than I did when she transitioned at the funeral. It actually was a sense of relief when she passed away, because she had terminal illness. So I knew the time was coming. And it was that shock to my system, so to speak, that really hit me hard and where I grieved most powerfully. So I grieved 5 months before she passed away.
Yeah.
After seeing her in her infirm state. And it was all internal for me. And it was something, and great, again, I'd done this work at this point. So when it happened, I wasn't shocked by it. And actually I was able to take care of myself during that process. But definitely the recognition that grief doesn't have to be after they're gone. It can be a certain pivot point. So for me, it was when she got to that point where I knew it's like, this is the point of no return.
Yeah.
So she would be gone within 6 months.
Yeah.
So for me, grief happened first.
Yeah, it's very interesting you said that, because my sister had a terminal illness, and a very fast one. She had pancreatic cancer, and that goes very fast. And so I agree. I was grieving once she got the diagnosis, and I could see how she was going so fast. With my mother, even though she was 91, all the people in my family lived till they're over 100. So the doctors, as I said, you're going to live to over 100. Her sister was 102. Her parents were 102 and 100. And so it was a shock. She fell over and she had a brain bleed, and we knew, I got the call, and I managed to get on the plane the next morning because she was back in Wales. And, I managed to get there in time. But by the time I got there, as I said, she was already in a coma. But it happened so fast, and I was grieving, as you said. I was grieving as soon as I got that call. I was a mess at the airport. I couldn't even find my things, and the airline was so lovely with me, because they understood. They said, "Is everything okay?" And I said, "I got to get to my mother," and they absolutely did everything they could to make me okay to get there. But once I got there, and I knew she was, as you said, then it was like, okay, she's terminal, even though it's not, a cancer or something. It's terminal within a day or two. I had a chance to come to peace with that. So I think you're right. I think sometimes there's a shock value, comes out of the blue, and there's other times when, I think the shock value is when you get given the diagnosis, but that's when you start the grieving process. But I also wanted to mention that, we tend to think of grief as to do with other people, or, as I say, situations. Even as I say, my grieving over the family unit breaking up. But so many people don't have children, and their pets are their children. And I think that we can sometimes diminish their grief, because it's like, well, it's only a pet, but that is your family. That's a family member. That's somebody that has been your constant companion and your love, and somebody you've cared for, often for many, many years. And that grief is every bit as real as losing a friend or a family member.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you want to share about your dog? Because I want about my dog. So go ahead.
You share about your dog, and then I'll share about my dog.
You're fine. My dog was, to be simplistic, was my longest relationship, in the sense that I had her 11 years. Got her when she was 3, past 14, and she was my close companion. I mean, yes. So what you said about animals, definitely, I had that feeling and experience with her. The thing was, the way her life ended was such a graceful experience. She was getting older. I mean, she was 14, and for her breed, that was getting towards the end of life. She was getting weaker and having challenges, etc., for months beforehand.
Can you just describe what she looked like so I can have a visual of her?
Yeah. Yes. Her name was Sheila. She was an Australian Shepherd Border Collie mix, black and white. She was about 60 pounds, good sized dog, really sweetheart, big smile. She was always a lady, and so there's a brief description. And I was living. She was living in Venice at the time, and a friend of mine who was an alumni from, also a classmate from mutual grad program, University of Santa Monica, who's an animal communicator, was over at the house. I was actually doing some work for her on the computer, and she basically, she says she's an animal communicator. I say she's telepathic, because she says things to me about my dog that she could never have known, and says things to me about me that my dog knew, but she didn't know. So it's like, she must be reading the dog's mind. They're talking to each other.
Yeah.
It sounds weird, but it's true. Anyway, so we were over at my house doing some work, and she suddenly said, it's getting very loud in here. I'm like, what do you mean? I don't hear anything. She said, my dog was talking to her loudly, saying this time she needs to get taken care of. Like, she's going through some stuff. And all these things lined up. The grace that happened here was amazing, because first of all, my dog was too old now to get into my car, because you couldn't jump in behind the seat like in the old days. But my friend had an SUV, a people mover, one of those, not an SUV, but one of those big, like, Dodge Caravan type things. Yeah. Because she had a dog as well, and so she had the back seats taken out. So that's a low platform. So basically, I picked up my dog and put her in the back of her vehicle. Went to the vet, who was not supposed to be there that day, but she happened to be in the office. Went to the vet, told her what's going on, and on the way, my friend said to me, he's like, do you want me to ask her the question? Like, is it time to go? And I said, yeah, please, because I wasn't sure if she was sick or what was going on. And she turned back to me and said, yeah, she said it's time to go. So I was going through like waves of the feeling of that process of being sad, and then the joy of, it was a really mixed emotional bag I was going through. Got to the vet, and the orderly came out after she went in to tell her what was going on. The orderly came out and gave her an anesthetic, my dog an anesthetic, so that she wouldn't feel any pain. At one point, my friend turned to me and started laughing. I said, "What's so funny?" I said, my dog's always been a lady. I said, I'm so upset because she's lying in the back of the vehicle, like on her side, with her tongue hanging out. And she's really upset she can't put her tongue back in her mouth, because she's basically so relaxed.
Yeah.
And so, there's some things where it's like in the middle of the sadness was suddenly this buoyant laughter, that joy that came up. Inside to the vet, and as we're gathering in the small room, was like me, my friend, the vet, and the orderly. As they're about there, sort of shaved off a bit of a paw of her leg, rather than going to give her the shot. Euthanasia. And so she said to me, Sheila has a question for you. And I said, okay. And so, and this is where it got really emotional, was she said, Sheila wants to know, what did I learn from her?
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
So we were in deep, it was tears all around for a few minutes as she was disappearing out, and I could feel her leave. But the thing was about the grief was, it wasn't, there was moments of grief through the process, but of course getting back home afterwards to the empty house, because she was no longer there. All I had was a little Ziploc baggie of some dog hair that they gave me, that was the emotion. It was like that night, and waking up the next morning, was that getting used to her not being there was the biggest or hardest part for me. Yeah. But it was such a gift in so many ways. I felt her around me quite a lot since, like with your mother in a way. I had that experience of my dog being with me at moments and just being reassured. So,
that's the beauty. We know that, we live in the 1% world, and there's this 99% world out there where all of us exist, and we can't see them anymore, and we can't feel them physically, but we can feel them energetically, and we know that they haven't gone anywhere. They're still in our life. They're just in a different form. But same thing with, it wasn't even my dog. I rescued this dog when he was about 18 months old from my youngest son. He wanted a boy's dog, a teenage boy dog. He was the same as you. He was a 65-pound dog. He was, I don't know what the heck was in him. I think it was definitely German Shepherd, a Rottweiler, a Border Collie, and what's the other one? They have the spotty tongues, Akita, I think it is.
Akita, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so I got home, And I have cats, so so they took him into the pantry and said, "Oh, look how wonderful he is with cats." And I'm like, "Fabulous! Let's bring him home." Oh my God, he loved cats, but he hated dogs. So after he did
Oh,
like attack the dogs in the neighborhood, I was like, "Oh my God." So this dog was, to say the least, a very challenging dog. But I also knew if I took him back to the pound, they'd put him down because he'd already been
right,
returned once before, and they don't give them the second chance. So
right.
I dealt with him for years, and I always used to say, he's the sort of stupid son that's going to stay home with me. Whilst my other son has left home and gone off, I'm going to be left with him. But anyway,
Right.
just to say, I fell in love with him. I mean, he was so funny. My boys would come and hug me, and he'd jump up and wrap his arms around us, and he thought he was my child. He was hysterical. But he went so fast. I'm not going to give you the whole story, but it was really shocking to me. And I ended up literally having to pick him up and take him outside to go to the toilet. But it was so hard for me to know when the right time was. And it was actually my son, who was his dog, was like, "Mom, you have to let go. He's suffering." And
Yeah.
I'm going to give a plug here because these people are incredible. They're called Lap of Love, and they come to your house. And when I first called them, I was sobbing so hard. I mean, I think I was on the phone for about 4 minutes before I could even get a word out. And
Right.
they were soothing. They kept saying, it's okay, we're here, we understand. And I'd start to talk again, and I'd burst into tears again. But they come to your house and they talk you through, and they're like, find a place your loved one like to be with his favorite toys. And they were just so gentle. My son, who lives in San Luis Obispo, everybody came down, both my sons and Oliver's girlfriend, and we just lay outside on the bed with Mello, his name was. He started off, my son called him Mayhem, but he was living up to his name too much, so I renamed him. I renamed him Mello. And
There you go.
as he was terrorizing the dogs in the neighborhood, they would go, "Really? Mello? Who are you kidding?" But in the end, he was Mello. But I have his little paw print, and I have his ashes, and but boy, it was really humbling for me, because I will admit that I think I might have had some, not judgment, but not enough compassion for people who lost their pets. I was comparing it to a person, and I thought, my God, for people that don't have children, these really are their children, their fur babies, as they're referred to.
It's the investment of love. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And unconditional love, that's the other thing. You don't have sort of, it's such a pure love. But again, going back to grief, as we said, it is a natural process. It's something to be honored. And I love what you said. It's a result of having loved incredibly deeply. And so just honor wherever you're at, and don't push it. So,
Right. I want to share a quote, because I share one quote about the one from one division about what is grief, said, if not love, persevering.
mhm.
The other quote's from a friend of mine. I have a few friends like that now. Okay, I have a few friends who are what we call trans channels. They speak to the dead, basically.
Mhm.
And yeah, it sounds very woo woo. I know some stuff we share today, people are going to go, "You talk about what?"
I don't think people are listening to us if they don't think we're a little bit woo woo.
Yeah, exactly. So one of my friends, she's in San Diego. Her name's Sarah Renee. She is a wonderful communication, a bridge maker, so to speak, between the living and those who passed. And one thing she said once, and I read vividly, is, remember, grief doesn't keep you connected to them. It keeps you connected to their death.
Mhm.
Love is the eternal connection to their soul. Remember that. And that's the thing that I think is maybe the biggest thing about grief for me, because it really reminded me that we don't grieve what we don't care about.
Mhm.
So when we grieve, sometimes we think about how bad it is and how we shouldn't feel that way and everything else. Like, no, in a way, be thankful that you're experiencing that much grief, because it implies, or it indicates how much love you actually had and have with this person or this animal or whoever it is you've lost. So when you lose a position, like you took an earlier about, there's different experiences you have where you lose a job, or the family unit shifts and you lose something, you're remembering how much love you have for that environment or that person or that position you had.
Mm-hmm.
And so being willing to let go of that and go through the grief process is, in a way, is out of respect for that which is already passed.
Yeah. And, and I was thinking as you were just talking then that, they say the final stage of grief is acceptance. And I think in a way, I always say that, acceptance to me is one of the most powerful places to come from. Because I often say our suffering doesn't exactly come from, it initially does come from the circumstances we find ourselves in, or a situation or whatever. But the continued suffering is usually resistance to that event or the circumstances we find ourselves in. So I think with acceptance, it makes room. It's like you're not fighting anymore. You're not fighting what is. You're not fighting, what happened. You're in acceptance of it. And then when you're in acceptance, there's a sort of a relaxing. And I feel that's when the love, you can actually focus more on the love. The love just pours forward once you're not resisting and fighting what is.
Absolutely. The resistance is one of those, let's just say resistance is not one of the steps, one of the stages of grief. Avoidance of it. And that's the thing. So grief is, there are stages. The one way of use an analogy, because as I mentioned, that the grief stages don't come in any order. It's like, the way I describe it is like being waves on the ocean. You can't predict when they're going to happen. They can't see how big they are. You don't know what's going to happen. They just do what they do. The thing about grief, so is for me, is that I don't believe personally that grief really ever ends. Because when we've lost someone, we do have memories of them that show up 3, 5, 10 years later that we didn't know about. So to understand that grief and the connection to those who have passed is something that's always part of our lives, which is the acceptance of that, is I think the only way to get through it.
Yes.
Because if we think it's done, then we're over now, we're never going to feel it again, we're denying what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, I think I hear what you're saying, and I think we will always reflect on them, and there will always be a tenderness and a soft spot and a vulnerability that comes from when we remember people we've lost or our pets, as we said. And I think that's such a beautiful feeling to continue to have that sort of ache, but it's a beautiful ache. It's an ache created by profound love and loss.
Absolutely.
Not from anger, resentment, denial. It does come at the end. It comes. There's a softness to it. So I don't even know if I would actually even call it grief as so much as a real poignancy. We will never lose that. And we want to lose that, because that is that lovely reminder of how deep we felt.
It's one of the gifts of being human, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, it is.
Well, that's the end of today's show, and I hope.
Oh man,
we can keep going forever about this. All right, then. Well, lovely seeing you again, Barry. I will see you next week.
Lovely conversation. And by the way, if any of you have been watching or listening to this, if you have any questions about grief, there are some good books I can recommend. If you want some support, definitely reach out. If you don't already have someone you can reach out to, a spiritual counselor, spiritual church, somebody you can go to if you're going through the process, find someone.
Yes, absolutely.
But,
So this is, don't isolate and allow people to be there for you. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us again, and we will see you next week.
We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well. So go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.